We will go on the record in the matter 23 CF 213, State of Wisconsin versus Bradley Scheuer. The state appears through Assistant District Attorney Holly Rockow in person. We have Mr. Scheuer appearing in person in custody with counsel Glenn Keene. We're set here today in this matter for a sentencing hearing after revocation. Mr. Scheuer was placed on probation after he pled guilty back on September 3rd, 2024 to one count of possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. 3 days after he was placed on probation, he was put into custody for another serious offense in which he was just recently sentenced. He was revoked on this matter due to the allegations and matters in the case that he was just previously sentenced. This matter was set for a revocation sentencing. Ms. Rockow, please begin your sentencing argument and recommendation.
Thank you, Judge. The state respectfully recommends that Mr. Scheuer be sentenced to the state prison system for a total of 4 years, with 2 years of initial confinement, 2 years of extended supervision. That is in line with the recommendation that was outlined in the PSI by the department. As the court's aware, we are to consider the Galleon factors here in determining an appropriate sentence for Mr. Scheuer. The state's position is that Mr. Scheuer must be sentenced to prison based upon the factors. As far as the gravity of the offense, possession of a firearm by a felon is very serious. The legislature indeed has deemed this a Class G felony with a maximum possible penalty of 10 years. It's a crime that poses a serious risk to public safety. This crime in particular, the underlying facts of this case warrant a prison sentence. Mr. Scheuer was at sentencing, there were 4 other counts that were dismissed but read in, including 3 counts of possession of a firearm by a felon in addition to this conviction. There were 4 total rifles that were in Mr. Scheuer's possession at the time of this incident. And on the date of that arrest, he admitted, and in fact, one was in his direct control, very nearby to him, and he had admitted to law enforcement to having handled that firearm in particular on that date. He also had a knife concealed in his possession.
Mr. Keene.
Your Honor, I do have one character witness for him. It's his son, Brandon Scheuer, who's here in court.
All right, Mr. Scheuer, you can come have a seat over at the black table.
Where do you want me to start? Glenn?
Oh,
Nope, you just.
whatever you talked about.
Oh, whatever to talk about.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll start off by saying that, I do think that violent criminals should be in prison. I don't think my dad's a violent criminal. I think that he has mental health issues that were never addressed for the last 20 years. And I do believe alcoholism amplifies those. And I believe getting mental health would help him dramatically. In the case of this issue, I could tell my father was a different person after the suicide. My father always had like a clean counter, dishes always done, up early. I would not hear from him for a couple of days after the incident. I would go check on him. He would still be in bed with a giant body pillow, counter trash, sink full of dishes, just completely not his character. And I believe that was just more depression. And I think that his depression and his mental health issues have never been addressed. And he's constantly been incarcerated and never gotten help that he's needed. And I think getting him the help he needs is a big step. Is he going to have to be in prison? Yes. But just locking him up isn't going to help him. He needs to get help. And I wish the court system would help more people in this case. It's an epidemic in this country where people are just locked away when they have issues and we don't address the mental health issues that we need to address. 3 of those guns that were locked in the shed on the day of that incident were mine for deer hunting. I had them locked in that shed. I believed I had the only key to that shed. I was unaware there was a second key. The .22 firearm that was used in the incident to my knowledge, was used for protection against bears as they were living in my camper on his 40 acres. When Crystal and my father first started staying on the 40, they were staying in a tent. They had bears that tear the tent, tear the coolers. I gave them my camper to stay in as a safety option. Other than that, the only real things I have to say is that I believe that this country has a problem with just locking people up and throwing them away. And I think that we need to address mental health issues more and more in this country. And this case in particular, he's had 20 years where he's never had that addressed. And he grew up at a time where when people had mental health issues, they really didn't talk about it or get addressed. And I believe most of his issues stemmed after the divorce with my mother in 2003. His alcoholism, which he hadn't drank in many years, had kicked off and came back into his life and continued to amplify those mental health issues. Because when people are depressed, the drinking don't help that. All it does is amplify those issues. And that was never, ever addressed in over 20 years of him being in and out of the system. That being said, I can't quite think of too much other things to say. I know my father is a very good person when he's not drinking. He has donated his time to my business during the parades and other things, and to help me with working with kids in the community for kayaking. He cuts and splits wood. He has helped friends of mine who needed trees removed or other things on their property done come over without even being paid to help out, just to be a good Samaritan. So I know there's good in him. We're not unlocking the good. We're locking the good up with the bad. Where we should lock the bad up and unlock that good. And the only way is to use, mental health therapy and other sorts of programs to get to the root of the problem. I went through therapy because of you, Judge, and I continue to do that therapy for a while after the things we had with the things I did to get back, and it helped me very much. I'd come creating new programs to help myself hydrate more, things like that, getting better eating schedules, just slight things to add more consistency to life and a more routine schedule. And I think, that helps a lot of people. And it's something I needed just slightly to help my life, but there's a lot of people that need a lot more than that. And they need that intense mental care. And that's something this country has gotten far, far away from. And I hope we get back to it.
Thank you, Mr. Scheuer.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Keen.
Yes, sir. When we look at this case and sentencing and the factors, I think a couple of things to note. Well, I won't dispute the seriousness of the crimes because Mr. Scheuer does have a lengthy criminal record. Most of it is for, substance abuse related issues, but you've seen it on pages 24 and 25. So, I won't dispute that. However, when we look at the character of the defendant, I would note that when you look at the offenses that day, his son had just talked about how, the 3 of the firearms were his, and it was, a place to hunt in the 40 acres. And he said that they were encased. I would note that my client on the day he was charged, had contacted law enforcement. He, pointed out, the weapon was not in, it was set by the vehicle when law enforcement arrived. He's not brandishing it. And his son had just testified that the 22 was, for, protection for bears. A 22 isn't usually a weapon if you're going to try and rob somebody, a 22 isn't your first choice. And regarding the dismissed and read in on the concealed knife, it's a 40-acre property, and he had it. There was nothing about him threatening to use it.
But I'm hearing excuses. He's a felon. He's a felon, a convicted felon, and I'm hearing excuses. Even in your defense argument, they're excuses.
I'd see them as mitigating factors rather than excuses.
There's other things to use to protect against bears. I've done it myself. I've grown up in bear country myself. I don't carry a 22 or a knife. There's bear spray. There's crossbows. There's other things that felons can use and carry. It's an excuse.
Well, and these guys, the firearm was owned by the person who lived there, not him. But I get that when you live with you're a felon, and the person you live with has a firearm, it tends to put you in an untenable situation.
And he admitted to operating it.
Right, moving it, yeah, okay. But I think we did point out in needs is that, the alcohol and counseling needs. And he did talk about, one of the things looking at revoked is that unfortunately, mental health needs did increase after that because his son did describe a change in my client's behavior after his then girlfriend unfortunately, took her own life that day. And, that obviously contributes to a downward spiral as well. And I would note that, when you look at protection of the public, I would note that, he already, for the offense he was, convicted, pled to in this court, he already had a 9-month sentence. And I think that, allowing him to be closer to his son and the community would probably do more in the long term to protect the community than a sentence, than just simply warehousing him again, which is what his son was saying. Because, it access to, counseling and other needs. So the offensive thinks that, a reasonable sentence would be 9 months of custody, because he already has a 9-month sentence in 24 CF 202. So if you sentence him consecutive that, then he's still closer to his family and other things, and hopefully could address his needs. And, if he qualified for Huber, he'd be in a confined setting, because obviously if you're, having to go to and from jail or report on monitor, that would be a way of ensuring sobriety, because when for the charge he was revoked, he admitted to having alcohol that day. I'm saying is if you disagree with our suggestion, obviously one of the decisions you'd have to look at is whether or not he would be eligible
He
for.
wouldn't be eligible for the challenge incarceration.
No, I'm talking about, no, I'm not talking about challenge incarceration.
For the substance abuse
Right,
program.
yes,
Right. Okay.
right. No, I'm aware that, he's 2.5 decades too old for challenge incarceration program.
All right. All right, thank you. Mr. Scheuer, now is going to be your opportunity to tell me your side of the case, if you wish to. Anything that you would like me to know about this case, about this matter, about yourself. I have read the department's revocation packet, which does include a lot of information, and it includes the decision by the ALJ, the alternate, or the administrative law judge in the revocation, as well as a few bits of other information. You can tell me whatever you wish to tell me right now, or you don't have to tell me anything.
Well, I'm gonna tell you one thing, that the gun was for her, it wasn't for me. It was for her protection. She was a girl from the cities, and she was afraid of the bear. The gun was given to her for her own protection. And it was supposed to be locked in her storage shed, and she had the only key for that storage shed. I don't know how the gun got, obviously she went and got the gun, plain and simple. I didn't know, I was at work. And she dropped me off, because I worked at the 10th hole. And she dropped me off, and then she picked me up. And then when we went home, that's when she went in and brought the gun out, plain and simple. But otherwise, yes, I myself believe I have post-traumatic stress. I was in shock. I never would want to witness anything like this in my life again. I feel sorry for vets going to war and watching people die. I love that woman, loved her to death. I moved the gun till the gun fell on her. It's the only reason I moved it. I didn't know if she was going to shoot me. I didn't have a clue. It's the only reason I moved that gun. The other guns I didn't know nothing about. Yes, I had a key. I had a key on my key ring, but I hadn't gone into the shed. I wasn't in the shed for days. And it was 2 days before deer hunting. That's all I know. And the guns that were in the storage, in her storage shed. And I know my son deer hunts, and he was supposed to have friends come over that didn't have guns, and they were going to hunt. There was no bullets, nothing there. There was absolutely nothing to fire out of them guns that were in that shed. Absolutely. There was just guns. That's all it was. Guns and gun cases. And I knew nothing about them. I knew about the 22 that she had because she asked for permission. And she got the gun from my son for her own protection when she was there by herself. That's what it was supposed to be for. And like I said, I only moved the gun when she shot herself and hit the ground. That's why I moved it, and I leaned it up against the car that was in front of it. Like my son said, I help him a lot. I help a lot of people. If you even ask the jailers here, I'm cleaning all the time. I ask to move to different cells just to go clean them because they're not clean. I help a lot of people. I buy canteen for people. I'm not a violent person. Yes, I do have mental issues. And with that, yeah, I probably have drank. I started alcohol. I was sober for 24 years. My kids grew up with a sober father because my father was an alcoholic. So when my kids grew up, I didn't drink. But when my wife divorced me and I ran through the coals, I started drinking. That's when I started drinking in 2006. If you look at the records, that's when all my problems started. And with that, that's all I got to say.
How many sheds were on that property?
Huh?
How many sheds were on that property?
One,
I just got multiple stories about the key or who had keys and who had access with that. First, you said she was the only one that had a key.
no, that was her storage shed in town. She had a storage shed in town with all her stuff, and she was the only one with a key for that shed. That's where the guns were stored, was in the shed in town.
That's where your son's guns were stored?
Yes, the guns that ended up on the property were in that shed.
All of the guns that ended up on your property where you resided in that camper were originally in a storage shed in town,
Yes,
but somehow they ended up all on your property on the camper.
because deer hunting was coming and she brought them for my son to go deer hunting. That's how they ended up there. Because it was 3 days before gun season. 2 or 3 days before gun season. It was on a Wednesday. And they were getting ready to go deer hunting.
And then they were placed in another shed that you had the key.
Yes, that a key was on my key ring, yes.
So you,
But I didn't know the guns were in the shed. I wasn't home when the guns were put there.
then how did they get into the shed if you?
I'm
had the
assuming
key?
Crystal brought them over for my son to go deer hunting.
But if you were the only one with the key,
No, I wasn't the shed at my house. No, I wasn't the only one with a key.
I wrote it down. You said I was the only one, I was on my key ring.
No, that's not true. I had a key and there was 2 other keys for the lock because the lock was for the shed and for the chain that went across my driveway down on the end. My son had a key to the shed.
I heard that and I knew that it was his property.
No, the camper is his. The property belongs to me.
40 acres is yours.
Yes,
And he brought the camper for you. So the
yes,
shed is yours.
yes,
The guns in the shed were not yours, but you had the guns in your shed.
yes.
Where
The
the
guns were
key
put in the
shed.
shed, correct. On a Wednesday, and then deer hunting was Saturday. But there was no ammunition for the guns.
Were you and the victim fighting that day?
No. No,
You weren't drinking together at the 10th hole and fighting?
no. No,
Then what happened that day? What happened where she picked you up?
Crystal
to the
was
10th
a
hole?
very depressed person. She was on a lot of medication and she was from Minnesota and she was losing all her medication. She put money in the bank, which I had to, remember when I signed the check for forgery and we got all that settled? because she had a check that she went to the bank down here in Simon and was gonna deposit because she didn't have an address. So she went down to the bank, Bremer's Bank, isn't it Bremer's Bank down there? And tried to put that check into the bank. And they told her they wouldn't accept it because she didn't have a permanent address. So she went to US Bank, which her and I had an account together. But then she moved back to Minnesota for her medication to a Jeannie, and I can't pronounce her last name's house, and changed her mailing address. That's how Crystal's daughter got the statements for the bank, which she put the money in US Bank, and US Bank wouldn't let her take the money out because she couldn't establish a address.
So again, I don't understand how this happened, because here we have a day, okay,
Yes,
where we have the victim dropping you off at the 10th hole to work.
yes,
And then you
in the
said,
morning. And then she went to the food shelf to help at the food shelf.
can you let me talk,
Yes.
please? And then she dropped you off at the 10th hole,
Yes,
and she went back and did whatever she was gonna do that day.
yes,
And then she picked you up from work at the 10th hole. And you're telling me she didn't have any drinks or alcohol.
yes, she did.
So she sat and she drank for a while.
No, she had one drink. She had a Bloody Mary.
She had a Bloody Mary. And she picked you up. Did you have anything to drink that day?
No,
So you didn't drink. She had a drink. She picked you up. She brought you back to the camper. You weren't fighting. There was no negativity between the both of you. You get back to the campsite, to your camper, where you both have resided and lived for a significant period of time. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she grabs a 22, runs in front of the camper or the truck and shoots herself in the head. That's what happened. That's what I'm hearing.
no.
Nothing happened that caused this.
When we were at the 10th hole, there was a girl in there that had black curly hair like Crystal used to have. She used to have long black curly hair. Well, she cut all her hair off and it was pure white. It turned gray. Well, this girl had the same kind of hair that Crystal had, and she had a low cut shirt. And when she went by, Crystal said, "Look at her hair." And I said, "Yeah, it's pretty." And I said, "She's got a nice cleavage too," because her cleavage was hanging out. And Crystal used to be the same way. Well, the girl next to Crystal turned to her and said, "Well, I'd like to do something with my hair." So I think one reason was that depressed her because her hair was cut off and it wasn't what it used to be. Crystal committed suicide more than once. I saved Crystal twice before this. One time she took a bunch of pills when we were living in Burnsville.
It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
She was a depressed person.
Respectfully, I think we're getting a little, we're simultaneously for having a firearm, and now it seems like the court is moving to trying to investigate.
What he did though, was he messed with the crime scene. By touching a gun, he messed with the crime scene. I'm not trying to go into anything. There were allegations, or there was discussion on whether or not there were facts for a homicide, Mr. Keene, before you were even involved. That was part of a plea deal with the original attorney, that homicide would be forever off the table as part of the plea deal. The court said that can't happen. That's against public interest. That
Right.
can't occur. So then that was removed as a plea deal. So the court's trying to understand here. I'm trying to get an understanding of how this could even happen. He knew that there was a firearm, a 22.
No, I didn't.
You didn't?
No, I didn't know it was there. The same with the other guns. That day, she must have went and got them and took them there.
And with the bears there, you
Just-
had no clue that there was a 22.
Yes, but the gun was still stored because the bears weren't around anymore.
You just said you didn't know that there was a gun, but yes, you knew that there was a gun, but it was stored somewhere. So there weren't bears there anymore. There's always bears. We're in bear country.
I realize that.
None of these, I'm just saying, Mr. Keene, none of his statements, none of his facts connect. That's what I'm saying.
Your
And
Honor, it
I'm
seems that-
trying to connect the facts. That's what I'm trying to do. Is he here for a sentencing of homicide? He is not, Mr. Keene. He is here for possessing a firearm as a felon.
Yes, sir.
And that's possessing is knowing there is a firearm in your ability to have possession of that firearm. I'm trying to connect the facts. It doesn't make sense if there was no fighting, if there was no negativity, if nothing occurred, and all of a sudden some girl with beautiful black curly hair and huge, delicious looking cleavage, and a statement is made that the woman would go and all of a sudden go home and nothing else occurred. She would grab a 22 and shoot herself in the head in front of her significant other without a statement made. It makes no sense. And then the defendant altered a crime scene. He manipulated a crime scene by taking a gun from a person who apparently, allegedly committed suicide. He took a gun and moved a weapon. He touched evidence. You do not touch a crime scene, whether it is determined a suicide or it is determined to be a homicide is not for Mr. Scheuer to determine. It is for the police to determine, and they were not given an opportunity to make any determination, and because he altered it. He altered the evidence.
There are people panic at various times and react in.
Exactly, but they cannot touch evidence in a scene. And here's the thing, again, we're digressing. I'm getting to trying to figure out that day and what happened and why we are here and what I am sentencing for. It is not simply a felon possessing a firearm. And as you stated, and that was part of your argument, there's bears. So you need a gun to protect yourself from bears. And that's why he had the knife, because he needed to protect
No,
himself from the bears.
The knife, the knife wasn't about the bears. It was just, if you're on a working property, a 40-acre property, you're probably going to carry a knife, have a knife on your property in the country. I mean, make cut branches, whatever. Just making a point that although it was a dismissed and read charge, there's a difference between carrying a knife in town and around people versus having one on your own property.
I get that and I understand that. But again, that's where I'm trying to connect the dots and I'm trying to see where we are, because as you can probably gather, this is a very serious case. You're arguing to have him released and just have him sentenced on the case that he was sentenced to, which again was very serious and serious domestic.
My argument was that since you'd already ordered that one to be consecutive, I was suggesting for a 9 months county sentence, because you'd already in 24 CF 202, you had declared that one to be consecutive to other cases. So I wasn't suggesting that the court, go from 2 to 3 years in prison as the DOC recommended, or the state's recommendation of 2 years in prison to, in essence, time served. I was arguing that, an additional 9 months in county jail that was consecutive to 24 CF 202 would be an appropriate sentence for
18 months of jail. And then otherwise we have the recommendation from the state of 2 years in prison and 2 years of extended supervision, or the recommendation of Department of Corrections for 2 to 3 years in prison and 2 to 3 years of extended supervision, and or the maximum possible penalty of up to 5 years in prison and 5 years of extended supervision. When we look at this case, and again, this is why I have to connect the dots and see what happened. And I'm not looking at this as a homicide. I can't do that. That is not what this is. But again, I do have to look at all of the facts.
I want to know why she did it too.
All of the facts as they occurred that day. Every single fact. And I have to determine credibility and whether or not I believe Mr. Scheuer that he says he did not know there was a firearm. And I'm hearing contradictory statements. That's why I asked the questions, Mr. Keen. That's why I asked the questions again in a different way and then again in a different way. And that's why I asked to connect the dots. Because one time I get one answer, one time I get another answer, when it really is the same question, just asked a little bit in a different way. Stop. So when I'm looking at this case, and originally you're looking at this case, he was charged with 5 crimes, 4 very serious felonies, up to maximum possible penalty of 10 years in prison for those 4 felonies. And a misdemeanor, up to 9 months of incarceration for that. Part of this plea agreement, this working the deal out with the state, you got a really good deal here, because the agreement called for pleading guilty to the 1 possession of a firearm as a convicted felon, and the rest would be dismissed and read in. So the maximum possible penalty hanging over your head is no longer 40 years and 9 months. It's 10 years. So 5 in, 5 out. So that's a pretty good deal, considering the facts and all that led to it. Because again, you could have been charged with altering a crime scene. There could have been other things that could have been charged here, but you weren't. And I understand where Mr. Scheuer is coming from that day of stating that the victim killed herself, took her own life that day. Again, I'm trying to wrap my head around what happened and why it happened or how it happened. With the facts I have, I can't. But what I have to wrap my head around is the actual charge that I have in front of me, and that conviction, possession of a firearm, convicted felon. I do believe that you knew that she had that 22. I fully believe you knew she had that 22. I fully believe that you had access to that if you wanted to. You were in a very significant relationship. As you said, you loved her dearly. You seriously loved her dearly. I don't know if you love her now. I don't know if that was your statement, and you're showing emotion as to her death. And I believe your son, Brandon, when he says that he sees mental health issues in you. I fully believe it. And I've seen, I remember Brandon a little bit from a few years ago. I haven't seen him in front of me, so I'm going to guess that he's done a lot of good things with his life, and he's made changes, and he's doing well. I believe him when he's saying he wants you to do better, Mr. Scheuer. And I believe him when he's saying that he sees a change from when you were raising him and when you were with his mother versus when the divorce occurred. And you, in the last case in which you were convicted in 24 CF 202 with the individual that you said wasn't your girlfriend, but she thought she was your girlfriend, and that was a domestic abuse incident. It wasn't charged as domestic abuse, but that was a violent act against another woman, against a woman there too, against a person. And mental health issues most likely were involved in that as well. I do believe that you do need assistance, you do need health, you need help, you need someone to provide you with the guidance and the therapy. I don't know how to do it. It's not just AODA, it's not just AA, and it's not just abstaining from alcohol. You have a significant criminal history as well. And that comes into play. So I do believe that prison is appropriate in this matter. So what I'm going to do is I am going to sentence you to 3 years of initial incarceration, 5 years of extended supervision. I will make you eligible for the substance abuse programming after 1 year of incarceration. I'm ordering that while in prison, you engage in mental health treatment and mental health programming. You have a mental health assessment and follow through. You have an AODA assessment and follow through. No contact with victim's family. You have 20 days to appeal. Should you fail to appeal within 20 days, you lose that right. This is a felony. No use or possession of a firearm for life. No voting in any election until your civil rights are restored. If you would like to use any type of weapons, you can hunt. You just cannot use a firearm. You can use a crossbow. You can use a pellet gun. You can use those types of things. You cannot use a firearm. And as far as the knife goes, I'm not the legislature. I didn't write that. Whether or not I think that is an accurate law or how it is written, I can't say. I'm not the legislature. But unfortunately, you cannot even have a knife in a pouch because you're a felon. Cannot even be in a pouch. And this is consecutive to your other sentence. No alcohol, no drugs. So absolute sobriety.